that you want to share this with, please go ahead and share that. So we've been talking about mental and physical health, especially, is of a lot of importance to us at Gateway and even otherwise. And during COVID, we just realized that that really is the most important thing that most people are ignoring or we're not able to focus at. The stress is increasing, the anxiety is increasing, a lot of things are changing, things change drastically, because of which maybe at some point we're ignoring ourselves and not really giving importance to both of these things. Hence, today we thought of just creating a webinar or a space where we can share a different perspective, openly share about our challenges, share about different structures that are working for us, and just really, if any of us can gain and take anything back that we can use back, maybe personally or in our organization, this is why we wanted to have this webinar. As you know, this webinar is absolutely free and it's open to everyone. So you can share this with your family members even right now if you want, really quickly on your phones. So we haven't, and when we started talking about this, we decided how should we go about this? And we have always been very lucky at Gateway to have some esteemed friends, people who are really, really good in their respective fields to come together. And what we really wanted to do with this is just have a clear platform where people come together and share their perspective. We have an esteemed list of panelists today. You see, I will be introducing them, but unfortunately we won't have enough time to share about each one of them in detail. I think it will take me 2 hours each if I have to share about each one of them. But they're extremely rich in their experiences, and I know 10 minutes is a very small period of time to share what they have to. But our session for today is only for us to start getting a little brief introduction into why is physical health and mental health both important, especially more during COVID-19. Just before we start, a few structures that we want to put into place so that we all have an enjoyable and our interactive session today is, if you want to make your notes for the session, feel free, grab a book, grab a pen, whatever you want, you can make your notes. Alternately, we'll also be recording them. Mariam, can you just say hi to everyone? We have Mariam here. Yeah, that's Mariam. And she will be recording this session, and later on we'll be putting this on our YouTube channel. So anyone can go back and always view it. We request you, out of default, your setting will be on mute to go on mute. Any panelists that will be sharing, please come ahead and just unmute yourself. We then have Rudri, who will be sharing the different PPTs with us while the panelists talk. Rudri, do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi guys.
Hi, so that's Rudri, who's very sweetly going to be our backbone for today's session. And she's literally going to be sharing all the PPTs with us. I just want to briefly show you today's schedule so you're well oriented with that. Rudri, can you just share your screen with us, please? Great. So this is today's session. You can take a second, 2 seconds if you want to just go through this. So this will also just help you to orient yourself to today's session.
Who's John Banta in your school?
You will hear about everyone as we go ahead. Each panelist will be speaking to us for 10 minutes. Manika is there. You will see her just after I finish speaking. She will be a reminder, and she's a timekeeper. Unfortunately, it's the worst kind of thing for anyone to do. But she will basically come on when every panelist is done with 8 minutes and remind them that you have only 2 minutes left. We do want you to share your thoughts and ask us questions. So please use the option down that you have of chat and just put in all your questions, thoughts, anything that you would like to share with us. And we will try our best to answer this in the question and answer round. We thank you all for joining us today and for really removing the time to do this with us. Thank you. Is there anything else that we're forgetting, Manika or Mariam, anything that we need to add? Okay. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to share the first presentation. Our first presentation is from us at Gateway. My name is Varsha and I'm the psychologist and the co-principal at Gateway. I will be sharing with you a little bit about the parents' perspective and the team's perspective about what really happened when COVID hit us. And with me, I have Manika, who's my vice principal and also a psychologist. She will be going ahead and talking to you more about the students' perspective. We then have Urvi, who will be joining us, who's a physical therapist and also heads our sensory motor department. She will be going ahead and sharing with us about the physical health at Gateway. And Manika, you can let me know when the time is up so we can go ahead and we can then talk. And I know that my time is over. Okay. Rudri, can you start with the first slide, please? Just give us a second till we load.
Load. You can see the presentation, right?
Yeah, thanks. That's okay. Okay, so we're going to share with you a little bit about our mental health at Gateway. I'll be taking it forward first. You can go to the next slide, Urvi. So on 11th of March, we suddenly had a lot of government directives telling us that we will have to shut down school. At this moment, there were lots of thoughts when I heard it for the first time. I'm the one in school who's in charge for all these notifications. My first reaction was, is this sheet really real? When are we going to shut school? What is the best way for us to inform people? Is this going to last? How long will this last? That night, I was typically a patient of anxiety. I couldn't sleep well. I couldn't eat well. I made a presentation about how can I share this with the team. And while I was doing that, I also made some 100 changes to it. No one ever prepares you for a pandemic, right? Your parents haven't experienced it. No one really knows what to do. And you just know that you have to learn on the way. This time I realized this was the first time that it hit me that this was going to be an anxious situation. And it's not something that would go in maybe a few days, but was for year to stay. So the first thing that I started doing was sharing this with our core team, the PTA, and having an immediate team meeting that we had to go ahead with. The thing that I realized during this time was, you can go to the next slide. It's okay, Rudri. The thing that I realized was that when you share something very openly with people and transparently, you might not always know the answers, but the support that comes in is absolutely beautiful. The minute I shared this first with the PTA and the core team, everyone said, tell us next what. The team so beautifully came together to know that they might only have 2 whole online learning, and they did an absolutely beautiful job while doing so. So we all were still scared, but I think we were just a little bit less scared together. We can go to the next one. We soon realized that we have to now look at what is important. This was something that none of us were prepared to deal with. So what do we do and what is the most important thing? At that point, taking care of everyone's physiological needs and safety needs became extremely important for us. If you remember during that time period, what really was happening, everyone was hoarding a lot of food, even toilet papers in some places. And we literally had to realize that one of our most basic needs was also tech support. Laptops were being sent home. There was a lot of training that started coming in. And people, I don't think, cared so much about clothing at that time. But this really, really became important. So
Varsha, your 2-minute warning.
Okay, so what we had to start doing is start giving a lot of tech support to our team and do this individually and in a group together. And we also had to ensure that there were lots of questions about finances at that point and what can we do. So how do we really go ahead and how do we really support each other? At this time, our founders assured us that we would all get our salaries and there would be no pay cut. And now we had to extend this to our parents as well. There were lots of conversations about how we are a non-profit and we can't cut the salary. So we can't reduce the fees. But instead, what we could do is we came up with a lot of flexible payments, taking individualized cases to see how to best support them. Next one. We realized that we need to start individualizing the emotional support that we were giving people. People were overwhelmed and they were tired. That's the time that we decided to shut school down immediately in 2 weeks, a little bit, so that everyone rest and we can go back and start deciding how do we come back and regroup. Next. Rudri can go to the next. So a lot of things changed here, right? Parents had more increased responsibility. They had to look after the family members. They also had to become a co-teachers. At this time, teachers had a lot more responsibility at home. They had to take care of their families, become good at tech, and also deal with a pandemic. So we started studying a lot about the best practices around us, what really makes sense, and took a lot of feedback from our parents and team. We then focused a lot on communicating. Timely communication was extremely important for us to ensure that we are doing this in the right way by not over communicating and overwhelming people as well. So we supported them proactively with a lot of things, check-ins with families, students, and team members to ensure that they were doing well and their mental health was important. And finally, we launched something known as the Gateway Mental Health Helpline, which was our way of reaching out. We have 5 psychologists on the team. What do we do and how do we go ahead? So we supported team members. This was a helpline for team members, students, and parents and their families for us to go ahead and support them with whatever kind of mental and emotional support do they need. We also are launching our first parent support group next week, in the next 2 weeks. And I will let Manika share with you a little bit more about what was the students' journey during this time.
Thanks, Varsha. So just like Varsha shared on 11th March, we shared with our team. On 13th March, we told our kids. And there was this excitement in the air. You know, everybody was saying, we don't have to come to school, yay! But also there was a heavy layer of anxiety, uncertainty. Our kids had so many questions, you know, when will we get to come back? What is COVID? Will I see my friends? And that was the day that was focused on us trying to honestly answer their questions. And I think the hardest bit for us as teachers was not having answers to some of those questions. At Gateway, we focus equally on the social, emotional, and the academics bit. But on that day, I don't think we taught academics at all. We focused on reassuring our kids as best as we could and ended the day with lots and lots of hugs. Rudri, you can go to the next slide. And then Monday hit and reality started to set in. Relationships and building that connection with our students is a key part of what we do. But how do we support our kids virtually? Our students thrive on routine. Sudden, there was no routine at all. We saw our kids were struggling. We could see that they were fighting, crying, hitting, screaming. And how do we reach out to them? We started to think about how in school, we would have sat with them, helped them take deep breaths. We would have put on some calming music. We would have used humor. But how do we do that virtually? We felt helpless, and that's when we closed for the summer. As you can see on the slide, we reopened our school on June 3rd for the new academic year, and this time we were ready to support our kids. We built in SEL classes into the timetable, just like we would have had we been at school. And we're now explicitly teaching our students coping strategies. We're talking to them about how to be okay with not knowing, what to do when there is a tech breakdown. Along with this, we're focusing on building that relationship and keeping that connection with our students strong. And we're doing this through lots of check-in calls. We're playing games online with our students. There's community lunches happening. And I'm happy to share that today, our kids and team alike, we're thoroughly enjoying virtual school, and we feel like we found that connection virtually. I'll pass it on to Urvi, who will talk to us a little bit about the physical health bit.
Hi. So just like Varsha and Manika shared about mental health, the other thing that we started thinking about was how do we support physical health? So when we started planning for virtual schooling, something that we're all still very new to, we started realizing that sitting in front of the computer for long hours will bring with it many health problems. And if we want to do this, we must look at how we can build a virtual school day in a way that it is healthy. Next slide. So to set up our students for success, we looked at 3 areas: ergonomics and posture, eye care, and sleep. Next slide. So our goal here is to ensure that students have an appropriate study space. The question here is where and how do you sit? Now, the privacy of one's home can mean that we may sit in postures that are less upright. Also, many students tend to have strong associations like sofa or bed is a place to relax or lounge. So the first thing we wanted to ensure was that each student has a study space that can support good posture. We recommended our students to use a desktop versus a laptop. Now, the goal here was like correct or relaxed posture. So we recommended that students must have a study space that is appropriate for their body size and height, with the back support that goes all the way to their neck, so that the body weight will be on the backrest rather than their spine. Now, good posture doesn't mean that we expect our students to sit upright all the time. Keeping kids moving is a great way to build good posture in the virtual classroom. Also, a lot of research shows that active learning, where the learner is physically moving, can really change the way the brain works. So movement is a natural way to help kids focus, and particularly during virtual learning, because sitting for long periods of time can make their brain processes slow and inactive. So teachers at Gateway plan for a lot of movement breaks that is embedded into their virtual lessons.
Urvi, this is your 2-minute warning.
Okay. So now movement doesn't always need to be a movement break, but you can think of ways on how to make it part of your lesson design itself. So for instance, here the teacher has used a movement activity for an assessment in a class. Now, every student at Gateway has virtual fitness classes built into their timetable. Exercises are focused on stretching and strengthening the postural muscles, as well as breathing exercises to improve lung capacity and immune system. Now, while we put in structures to support posture, another critical area was eye care. Now, we know that screens emit blue light, and for growing children, this can particularly be very harmful. So, how much is too much, and how do we minimize the impact of screen time? A few guidelines that we put in place for virtual lessons were distance from the screen. Now, the recommended distance is about 20 to 28 inches, which is approximately an arm distance away. We looked at screen brightness. Now, this is very unique to individuals, because if it's too high, then students may squint or rub their eyes, or if it's too low, then it may be difficult for them to read, or they may come too close to the screen. So the key was to keep a close watch. If a student would appear uncomfortable, we would work with the parents, recommending them to adjust the brightness of the screen. Another thing that we did was, as a universal rule, keep the size of the font big and highlight text. This would really help our kids read better, even though they were sitting one arm distance away. Next slide. You can go to the next slide. In every class, we incorporated eye breaks. Basically, we are adopting the 20-20 rule, where you take a 20-second break every 20 minutes and look 20 feet away. And honestly, this has been interesting, because even though we put these structures in place, a lot of our children still struggle with screen time. So I think there are no right answers, and we must constantly revisit whatever things we're putting in place for our kids. Next slide. And lastly, sleep. So many of us have been experiencing difficulty either falling asleep or maintaining sleep during these times. Now, there are various factors that could be impacting sleep patterns. So as Varsha and Manika mentioned earlier about how there is so much anxiety and uncertainty about this whole pandemic, which is really one of the major factors resulting in irregular sleep. But not just for our children, but also for us. And apart from this, increase in screen time, significant reduction in physical activity, irregular bedtime, unhealthy eating patterns is all adding up and impacting sleep. And also we realized that quality sleep is so critical for our students, because all the learning that happens in the day gets consolidated into long-term memory during the deep stages of sleep. So sleep is a very important part of something that we had to look very closely into during virtual learning. Next slide. A few structures that may help with this are restricting exposure to devices post 7 p.m., monitoring eating patterns, particularly avoiding sugar or caffeine intake like cold drinks for kids, including at least 45 minutes of physical activity, as many sleep studies show how a certain amount of physical exertion is needed to trigger sleep, following a consistent sleep time and wake up time. And you can go to the next slide. And lastly, incorporating mindfulness, happy reading time, yoga to really help with all that anxiety, not just for our kids, but also for ourselves. Yeah, thank you, Varsha. I think you can take it from here.
Thank you so much, Urvi. Thank you for sharing. So a lot of work was done at a very short period of time, but I think in hindsight, we are quite happy with the work that was done. And from here, we're moving ahead. The next panelist that I would like to invite is Reshma. Reshma, if you can just say hi to everyone. Rudy, you can just off the screen for 2 minutes. Reshma Piramal is our next speaker, and she will be talking about social, emotional, and ethical well-being. She's the head of operations for South SPE Learning India and Max India Foundation. Social, emotional, and ethical learning is an innovative education program developed by the University, where educators use tools to foster the development of adults and students emotionally, socially, and ethically. Reshma is also a renowned speech and language therapist and has been on an advisory board, always guiding us and giving us great insights. Thank you, Reshma, for being here with us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Varsha. So I presume, hello everyone. I trust everyone is well and staying safe and your communities are well too. Given that John and I sit on your board, I am presuming that we get a few extra minutes more than the others. No, I'm just kidding. So a lot of actually what I wanted to share in some way has been addressed in the earlier session, because I know that Gateway is such a wonderfully progressive school adopting best practices. But yet again, I'm going to bring about, or rather share with all of you, some research, but particularly practices on how one can start incorporating social emotional. SEL seems to be the big buzzword right now. Almost every single person who hasn't got onto the bandwagon has almost immediately started saying, you know what, we need SEL for our school. So I wanted to actually very realistically share and talk there and why the social, emotional, ethical learning body of work is very different from what it already exists. I'm going to quickly talk about a study that was recently quoted in a session that I attended a few days ago. And it was a Chinese study that was a very massive and large study that was assessing stress levels in their population in the last couple of months. And the stress levels were alarmingly high. They were 54% of the population had between moderate and high stress levels. And I think that would be a study that perhaps one could in some way generalize to most nations, given the fact that we're all experiencing similar things. But what largely stands out is the fact that there is uncertainty and fear. And uncertainty and fear are actually two emotions that we're constantly grappling with. And they take very, very destructive biological toll on all of us. But the thing to remember is that today it's the COVID pandemic. Tomorrow it might be a cyclone. There's war, there are relationship issues. There is financial uncertainty, and there's always anxiety and fear associated with that. And I think the thing to remember is that mental health issues are the disease of this generation. We no longer are going to be dealing with the cancers and the infectious diseases of the last century that were largely predominating. It's depression, it's anxiety. And the thing to remember is that this is the human condition. We're always struggling. We're always dissatisfied. And more importantly, there's always uncertainty. So I'm not going to get into the sobering statistics that a lot of people present, talking about the WHO studies, about how India suicide rates and, how India is very, very high up in terms of mental health related issues, one of the highest suicide rates in Southeast Asia, and World Happiness Report indexes, etc. I'm not going to get into that. I mean, I think that's something that we all are very, very aware of. But instead, I'd like to address the solutions. What can we do? How is it that we can manage to control these emotions that constantly keep arising? And the most obvious and evidence-based approach that is now being spoken about is training of the mind. How does one move towards calming the mind and a more equanimous state of mind? So given the fact that we all recognize that there is this problem, the idea is how are we going to address it? And the social, emotional, and ethical body of work was actually initiated by His Holiness the Dalai Lama several years ago, where he was constantly talking about the education of the heart along with the mind. And it was through his partnership with Emory University and the Mind Life Institute, where leading scientists in the area of neuropsychology, psychology, education, all came together to actually work to create this body of work that would be disseminated globally free of charge to everyone who wished to use it. It is deeply grounded in ancient Indian wisdom. So when a monk tells you that this is how we've been for millennia training the mind, no one listens. But today, when science is able to support it and is able to show and articulate it in scientific parlance, then we sit up and start listening. So the idea is that we are all perceiving the world through our five senses, as well as the brain. But there is a sixth sense, the mind, and we're not really focusing on this sixth sense and how does one work and train it. Could we go to the next slide, please? Great. So noticeably, what has been around, which is a more recent phenomenon in the last 20 years, is the work in the area of social emotional learning. Dan Goleman was one of the first people who started working, and he quoted emotional quotient, which a lot of people are aware of. But since then, it's moved on to SEL. But it's the first time people have started actually looking and studying the mind, not the brain, and looking at what it does to our inner world and the ability to articulate for us skills that we can cultivate to flourish. And I'm using the word flourishing and well-being here because every single one of us wants to be happy. Every single one of us wants to be free of suffering, whether they're emotionally, emotions, physical, sensory related ones, but largely the afflictions of the mind. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been talking for a long time about educating the heart, along with educating of the traditional education which educates the mind. But what do we mean by educating the heart? We don't really have a whole neural network out here in our chest, but what we mean by educating the heart is largely meaning training of the mind. And in the last 20 years, a literature review shows that Western psychology had no study and no use of the word compassion. Compassion was visibly missing from Western psychology. And it's only in the last 20 years, catalyzed by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, as well as leading scientists in the area of neuroplasticity, that they started looking at compassion. So I'm going to bring in an analogy over here. For example, if one was to look at dental hygiene, we've only started brushing our teeth in the last 200 odd years. I mean, it was not something that was genetically passed down to us, but we've come to recognize that dental hygiene is vital. And if one does not take care of one's teeth, then there are a series of things that follow. So similarly, it is now that we are actually looking at emotional hygiene. We've never really addressed emotional hygiene. You go to the gym and work out the muscles to make sure that you're physically fit. It's important to recognize that you need to also start working the muscles, the brain, and largely that being the seat of the mind. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the social, emotional, and ethical learning program. If we go to the next slide. Rudri, could we move to the next one, please? Great, thank you. So what sets C learning, this precious body of work, how does it differ from the other SEL programs that are around? I thought I'd just very briefly talk about this so that we have a certain context. So one of the predominant differences is attention training. No one else is looking at training of attention. That is the fundamental building block. That is basically what is the precursor to everything, what is very broadly termed as mindfulness. But the idea is to kind of turn turn our lens inwards. So how does the inner homeostasis affect us externally, and largely how does this also enhance and improve learning outcomes in schools. So attention training is one thing that we focus on that isn't there in other SEL programs. The other very and I'll give you one example again, just to make it more real, is that the supermarket example that Varsha also talked about, just particularly right now when we're talking about this COVID crisis. Everyone was going and hoarding, right? But if one is in awareness, then one would think that just like everyone else, I may not want to be buying 30 bottles of shampoo. That awareness is something that we need to cultivate. We have the innate capacity to be aware, but we're almost always just kind of, so cluttered with so many things that we're not necessarily thinking. So that's one kind of example of being in a state of heightened awareness. The other thing that differs is it's an ethics-based program, and what we mean is actually compassion. I'm going to go a little bit more into detail on compassion, not just kindness, but we'll talk about that a little later. And one of the things I would briefly like to just bring in over here is the idea is how does one cultivate implicit bias. Explicit bias, yes, but implicit bias is something that is pretty inborn. It's subtle, it's non-conscious. We're looking at inequity that's there across the globe. But can we work to cultivate equity through the practice of compassion and get rid of implicit bias that kind of is in some way all pervading? So that's again something to think about. The other thing is it's trauma informed. So we're working with body literacy and developing resiliency. So it's a resilient, it's a program that develops resiliency. And it's a wonderful program because we learn how to regulate our nervous systems and looking at things not just from the lens of, acting on things, but first kind of, calming ourselves down before one acts out. And that's very, very, crucial. I guess that the team at Gateway also is very, very aware about how that works, because that in itself, you have a choice and we can discern how we choose to act. The moment you, cultivate resiliency, what ends up happening is you end up bringing your body to an okay zone or a resilient space or an equanimous state before one acts. So that's another
Reshma, this is your 1 minute warning.
Okay, 1 minute left. Okay,
yes.
Great. It's a systems-based approach. So we're looking at the entire system, and it's an evidence-based approach. So let's just go quickly to the next slide. I wanted to just kind of, the next slide, please. So because we don't have the slide, I'm going to just keep talking. So how does, let's move, skip this slide. Let's move to the other slides, the next one. We're going to talk about how does one change a system. And we're using schools as institutions, cultural institutions, to change system. Next slide, please. Schools that focus on cultivating a new generation of individuals, but more importantly, teachers. And teachers need to know what C-learning looks like. Can we move to the next one? So what we have is a pedagogy that is not just about delivering content, but about embodying that content. And I'll very quickly, if someone just plays this, we're working on the principle, the neurons that fire together, wire together. So how do we create pathways that are over a period of time in some way deepened and widened, so that our patterns, habitual patterns, shift from existing ones to newer ones when we work towards cultivation. We'll move to the next slide. So it's about teaching teachers how to deliver social emotional learning, or rather compassion in classrooms. So it's like teaching a child how to play a guitar, but you've never known how to play a guitar, and then suddenly you're telling a child, hey, listen, this is what you do, press this chord. But so what we want to do is we want to get teachers to actually experience this before they take it into their classroom, have their own critical insights. So it's a very, very long and immersive process, and it's a process that happens parallelly. We'll move to the next slide, the last two slides that I have. So we have a very wonderful framework. It works on 3 levels, 3 domains: at a personal level, a social, and a systems level. And we look at 3 dimensions. We begin with awareness, and that moves on to compassion, engaging with compassion. And eventually, how does one look at it from a systems point of view when you look at action and engagement externally with the outside world? So mindfulness looks inwards, and social emotional learning looks outwards, because it's about the skill set in engaging with the external world. And the social emotional ethical learning piece marries the two. So you have an inward focus as well as an outward focus. I'll go to the last slide. So it's largely a teacher well-being program. It's a journey that we invite teachers and students to take together. So both of them are learning parallelly. There's some amount of deeper immersion in teacher well-being that happens before you take it into the classrooms. As I mentioned, you can't take something unless you develop praxis and unless you begin to embody it yourself. And taking it into the classroom through very, very specific learning experiences, but learning together with your student is vital. And we've got a lot of, just the last slide, there's a slide which has more information if you want to know more about C learning. We've also got weekly challenges for our parents and those who in some way have no experience of C learning in their schools, but there's, you can always start off at home. So that's up on our Facebook page. But I'd like to actually end with a quote and say that we no longer have to be bystanders. We need to demand of the education system, of our schools, a program or a set of skills that equips our children, but also ourselves, because the world is a place which has lots of sharp stones and thorns. Are we going to cover the entire earth as the instead we can cover our feet with shoes? So the idea is to train the mind and equip ourselves to deal with this volatile world in a manner in which is evidence-based. So thank you very much. Very rushed, but I'm hopefully giving you a glimpse of what this program is.
Thank you, Reshma. Thank you very much. I'm sorry this is, I wish we had more time. Maybe next time we'll maybe keep the time a little bit longer.
No, that's perfectly fine.
What we are going to do at the end of this is we're going to share the presentations and put this up on our YouTube channel as well, so people can take it from there. But thank you so much for such a beautiful sharing, for making spirituality sound so simple and so attainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Reshma. We're now going to move to our next panelist. Her name is Dr. Tanuja Prem. I find it a little weird to introduce her in this certain way, because for me, she will always be a wonderful mom to one of our kids in school, and definitely someone who I keep going to whenever I need any parent perspective. She is a psychotherapist, a life leadership trainer, an educationist, special educator, and a drama therapist. Like I said, there are a lot of credentials to each one of them. Just recently, she's doing a project called the Project Dharavi Matters, which reaches out online to school and college students from Dharavi and teaches them essential skills to cope with current times. Tanuja, I'll let you take over from here. I know you have a lot of that to share with me on the panel today. Please go ahead.
Thank you so very much, Varsha. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
I think Varsha went overboard with listing everything. I told her to introduce me as the crazy woman. Okay.
I think that will make out by the end of the session. Okay.
Okay, so the basic idea is, we're here talking about mental health, and we all are facing the big C. Yeah, understand the big C is COVID-19, staying home, and all the different challenges. Yeah. So what are the different challenges that we have? We're all cooped in one little home where we have to cope with our psychological needs, our social well-being, connecting with each other, our emotional stability. As adults, we are expected to be the ones who don't rock the boat, but the ones who manage everything. How all this is happening in the bigger world impacts how we think, act, how we feel. Yeah. And how we are programmed helps us determine how we handle the stressors, how we relate to each other, and what choices we make. I loved what Reshma said about making decisions and how we have to learn how to, stay calm and move on. And that journey is something wherein we have to work with not leathering, or rather paving the world with leather, but leathering our souls and moving forward. So that was a beautiful learning, a fantastic takeaway from me, on which I'm going to base the rest of this. Okay. So when we make choices, the choices are all about how we are protecting our family. Yes, we are sanitizing. I think we're going crazy sanitizing ourselves. But are we really sanitizing our mental self? Big question mark. When you hear of a COVID-19 case in the area around you, what happens to you? The first thing is panic. What if it's come to my building, it's come to my wing, it's going to enter my house? Where is it written that it's coming to your house? Show me proof. There is no such proof. But we overthink things and we open doors. And because we are so paranoid, sometimes we let in COVID-19, we invite it right into our home, into our brains. It's a virus that is impacting our brain more than anything else, the way that we are thinking more than anything else. Okay, so mental health is very, very important throughout life, right from the time a child is born to the time we move on. What happens to us now during the C-19 time? What are we doing with ourselves within the confines of our home? That is very, very important. Okay, I've seen a lot of people change the way that they view themselves in these last 3 months. These last 3 months have been a huge reality check, because we are always evaluating ourselves based on what everyone else thinks about us. But what about who and what I am? If you're not paying attention to me and you're working on your screen, that means you definitely don't love me. Where did that come from? Because we are home, all of us are expected to have dinner on the same dining table, which has never been the practice for the last 20 years, maybe. So, what is all this happening? Feeling loved, wanting to be connected with each other, our need for approval. I am working, I don't have maids, my nails are gone. I am working so hard and there's no appreciation coming my way. Why do you need that external validation to feel worthy about yourself? Think about it. Okay, I'm just going to leave you with certain points. Factors that affect our mental health definitely are the way that we view ourselves, because we operate completely based on our thoughts and our belief system. Okay, if you love yourself, whether somebody is shouting at you or yelling down at you, you're going to continue to feel happy and loved, because you have a lot of confidence within yourself. And the way that you interact with yourself and the people around you is what your children are going to take home. Yes, family breakups, the arguments, the huge loud discussions, the difficult behaviors, especially for children, for parents with children having disabilities. We see that there's a lot of difficult behavior that we are facing every day. Reason being, there's a shift. The routine has changed. Schedules are no longer the same. So we have to learn. It's a really masturbation phase here, where we need to learn how to work with this difficult behavior, identify the triggers, and move ahead. Physical ill health. Yes, of course. Okay, I'm a cancer survivor. When I was diagnosed with cancer, my thought was, what next? How am I going to get out of this? It was not about, oh my God, my life is over. So the view that you take about the event or the incident that happens in your life is what is going to pave the pathway for your recovery and your mental health. Physical, verbal, emotional, sexual abuse, whatever kind of abuse, if it's being meted out to you, does not mean you need to take it on a tray and wrap it around yourself like a cloak. It is not an award that is being given to you. It is something that you need to be active and take active, care that it doesn't affect you in any way. If there is somebody you can reach out to, ideally reach out to a professional. Call out to 100. 100 is very responsive, even during this time. Okay. And COVID-19. COVID-19 is something that has taken over our lives in ways that I don't think our life is ever going to be the same again. Is it? I don't think so. We are all going to be going out with masks, and at Gateway we hug each other so much. Now it's all going to be namaste and hi, how are you? Right? So this is the way that COVID-19 has changed our mindset, the way that we are stepping out. We are so overcautious. But it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. Don't look at all the negative news that you're receiving, through all the different websites and social media news and everything. Also look at the positives. How many recoveries, how many mild cases there are. Okay, so think about all those factors and learn to move forward. Yes, Rudri. The next slide, please, sweetie. Two aspects of mental health that we look at are mental well-being okay, and your ability to develop a coping system. There are going to be ups and downs all the time. Hello? Yes. So there are going to be, ups and downs all the time. So we need to look at how we can learn to be mentally healthy and how we deal with the challenges that come into our lives. Is it going to be either my way or the highway, or is it going to be, all right, this is the situation that has come in. How do I cope with it? And how can we achieve a compromise? By compromising, you don't become a lesser person. Okay, which is what I've heard in the last 3 months is why me, why me, why me, why me. Why you? Because you're the adult in the home. Why you? Because you're the responsible person. Why you? Because you are somebody who's able to feel and take that decision which needs to be taken. If you feel overwhelmed, please reach out. Our mental health helpline on the Gateway website. Is it on the website? I'm not sure. No. So
we shared it with everyone. We have the details as well.
Okay, thank you. So we have this where we are giving absolutely free service. We are talking to you. We are there for you. Come, reach out. We'll be there. We'll help you to work through building positive relationships. Take that little time out for yourself every single day. Spend time doing what you love, so you don't spend time cribbing about things. And just because I'm talking about being mentally healthy doesn't mean you ignore your physical health. Okay, if you're getting up from your sofa to go into the kitchen to get a glass of water, use exaggerated movements. Move your entire body. It's nice. Okay, do stretching. Dry clothes. Yeah, I reach out. I'm nice and roly-poly, but I'm still very flexible. Okay, why? Because it's about keeping yourself physically healthy also. Breathe. COVID-19 impacts your lungs. So blow in balloons. Do as many breathing exercises as you can. That is going to keep your lungs healthy and strong. Ask for help because nobody here is Superwoman or Superman. We are all human. We need the help. Okay? And what are problems? What are problems?
2-minute warning.
Absolutely. Thank you. And what are problems? Problems are nothing but challenges that we need to overcome. Nothing but challenges that we are going to overcome. Rudri, the next slide, please. So when you're faced with problems, don't look at the negative connotation with worry and stuff like that. Instead, start thinking about what and how you're going to overcome those challenges. Okay. So first and foremost, check what challenge you're facing. Identify whether it's worth changing, whether it's something that can be ignored and swept away. So connect with yourself. Believe in yourself that you can be somebody who can create the change in your life. Be proactive. If you feel this is getting too harsh for me, I can't deal with it, reach out to a professional. Keep learning. Keep learning about something new. Now that there are so many webinars, every day you can learn something new. Build a positive relationship with yourself and the people around you. Just because somebody is not looking at you as or giving you the look does not mean that they have something in mind for you. They could be thinking about something. They could be in a bad mood. Let it go. Okay, give yourself the time to develop a healthy and positive emotional, physical relationship with self. Take out those 10 minutes, 20 minutes every single day. Take notice and be mindful. Don't allow your mind to be full of so many things. Okay, make physical lists, write them down, use checklists if possible, but be very mindful even about what you're saying. If you don't have anything nice to say about somebody, don't say anything at all. Decide whether you need to be reactive or you need to be responsive. These are things which are going to keep you absolutely stable, whether COVID-19 hits us, the bio war hits us, whatever comes our way, we are going to create happy times for ourselves.
And Tanuja, that's your 10-minute warning. Wonderful.
Happy times. Thank you.
You can summarize it if you want, Tanuja.
I just wanted to say that one thing we need to do is, check, connect with yourself and change. There's no shame in reaching out and changing oneself. Yeah. Create happy times for yourself always.
Thank you very much, Tanuja. Thank you very much for always sharing these very practical tips with all of us and keeping us grounded. Thank you for your time. Our next speaker today is Dr. Parul Tank. She is a psychiatrist, and I just wanted to give you a very brief introduction before we go ahead. She's one of the most well-reputed psychiatrists that we have in Mumbai and has been practicing for the last 19 years. She's the head of department at Rajwadi Hospital and a consultant at the Fortis Hospital. I have personally worked with Parul very often with a lot of clients and a lot of kids. And I love her client-centric approach, her empathy-driven approach towards mental health generally, and just how simply she actually explains how the mind works with her wonderful smile. Parul, I welcome you today to take the session ahead. Thank you for being a part of us today.
Thank you, Varsha. Thank you to the Gateway School for inviting me. And I realize that we are kind of running short on time, so I'm going to come straight to the presentation.
Urvi will help you with it.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So my talk today is on mental health and well-being, and I thought I'll give a very brief overview and a quick overview of the two major mental health issues that we are facing in society today and how to recognize them. Next slide. So I feel mental health problems affect each and every one of us. It's not just 3 out of 5 people. Each and every one of us at some point in our life has undergone mental health issues. Next slide. We all know that it is a stigma. And I think the recent events have made it all the more evident that what a big stigma we are dealing with in India and I think all over the world as well. And I feel talks like these, forums like these do help to destigmatize it just a little bit. Next slide. So we have, I think mental health has played an important role since time immemorial. We've had, very, very great people also who've had severe mental health issues, but suffered through it, but even lived through it and even done well through it in their lifetime. What are the 4 main illnesses? Next slide. So in psychiatry or in mental health, our 4 major topics are always depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and substance use. Next slide. We deal with depression all the time. In fact, WHO has said that depression is going to be seen in 25% of our population. That's like 1 in 4 people at some point in their lives. And Varsha, since we have 100 participants, at least 1/4 of us at some point have had depression or will suffer from depression. We see it as an average from 30 to 40 years, but believe me, I've started seeing it in children quite a lot as well. What are the causes? Next slide. These are the causes that we think they are. So whenever I have clients and caregivers, they always say, oh, you know what, people say it's all in my head. There's nothing wrong with you. Come on, snap out of it. You're making excuses. Ye kya chal raha hai? Of course, these are the causes that we think they are. Next slide. What really causes it is stress, severe stressors, major as well as minor, because major for some would not be major for the others. We have chemical and hormonal changes, and of course genetics, which unfortunately, like COVID, we have no control over. Drugs, alcohol, all precipitate depression, and of course there are some medical conditions as well. Next slide. So does that mean that just because I feel sad for a day or 2 that I'm suffering from depression? Absolutely not. These are 8 symptoms that I've listed. So today psychiatry has become quite an exact science. So it doesn't mean that, oh, you don't know when you're depressed and when you're not. The clinician or the professional psychiatrist will determine when you are depressed. So 5 out of these 8 symptoms for a period of 2 weeks is said to be symptoms of depression. So as you can see, low mood, lack of interest, irregular sleep and appetite, feeling like not doing anything, a feeling of helplessness, all these symptoms, but at least 5 should be there out of 8 for 2 weeks to be diagnosed as depression. Next slide. You have something known as the depressed child as well. So even in children, we have depression. Unfortunately, they're not that vocal emotionally, or they don't have the gift of the gab often. So they will complain of things like headaches, stomach aches, they will get angry. I've seen a lot of adolescents maybe cutting themselves, trying to express themselves that they are frustrated and of course depressed. Next slide. What is the course? Would you believe it? If you treat it, 70% recover completely and fully. If you don't treat it, you have a relapse of at least 50% within 2 years. So it's worthwhile looking at it, addressing it, and treating it. Next slide. What can be done? If it's mild depression, just therapy or counseling, which is done by a professional. So please don't go to your aunt next door to do it. If it is moderate, given, they are not lifelong, they don't damage the brain, they don't cause severe side effects. Given for at least 6 months, they work beautifully and should be tried for moderate to severe depression. Of course, no drugs, that means no cannabis, no alcohol, preferably none when we are taking medicines and having depression. Next slide. I come now to anxiety. Nowadays, along with COVID, so it is like a rocking chair. It gets you something to do, but really gets you nowhere. Next slide. What are the symptoms of anxiety? Just feeling very anxious, feeling fearful all the time, panicking all the time. Some people go a lot of checking. Maybe they are obsessed with certain issues, or they are fearful, phobic of anything and everything. So I had a client who was completely phobic of every vegetable entering her house, and she was constantly washing them, thinking, with this I'll get COVID. Isse to nahi ho jayega. So it reaches a very mammoth proportion. Does that mean we all suffer from anxiety disorder? Absolutely not. Even this has criteria, just like depression. So it has certain criteria which the psychiatrist has set to be diagnosed as an anxiety disorder. Next slide. What's the treatment? Medications. There are actually good medicines that come even for anxiety disorders. Therapy, counseling works a great deal. And of course, we have our indigenous techniques like yoga and relaxation. Next slide. I've just introduced this slide and I realize I have paucity of time. I just thought I'll say some people may have even more enduring and severe illnesses. Not all of us. This is hardly seen in 3% of our population. But they get completely lost or out of touch with reality. Well, they definitely need medications. Next slide. Now, the good thing is that none of these disorders need a blood test or a brain scan. So when they say, please do a blood test to diagnose this, no, this is done by a clinician. You do need to go and visit a mental diagnose this. Medications are easily available all over the world, in India especially. We manufacture most of them. It is very easily treatable. It is generally not lifelong disease, and there is no stigma if you get diagnosed with it. So please see that people around you, friends, family, do get treated with simple medicines for depression and anxiety. Next slide. Why am I saying all this? In the times of COVID, I think apart from physical symptoms, mental health has come to the forefront finally. So what are the common things that I am seeing with my patients? Most of them are extremely anxious that I will have it or I will acquire it. Or people who have been depressed in the past got better, maybe they're having another bout of depression because of course, COVID is very, very stressful. Increase in a type of anxiety called OCD. A lot of people are not just depressed with COVID, but with the various variables that come with COVID. So with the news that comes daily, day in and day out, the job stressors that is coming with it, the economic stressors that are coming with it. And unfortunately, not a lot of this is controllable. Next slide.
Dr. Parul, this is your 2-minute warning.
Yes, I'm done. What should we do? I think recognize and become aware that there is a disorder like this and get it treated. Let's seek help if we fit the criteria, because treatment is there, it's available. We seek professional help. There are helplines. There are friends. There are family. I would add on to what the previous speaker so beautifully said, that we need to have a routine throughout the day to see that we do not fall into this. Exercise, diet, some amount of social contact, we are doing it virtually anyway, will help us to kind of stabilize. And of course, the actual facts, how many are actually suffering very severely from COVID and how many are getting better. Last slide. I think sometimes if nothing helps, prayers help. And this is a prayer I have got from the Alcohol Anonymous group, which says that God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank
Parul.
you.
So much information in such a brief period of time. I don't know
Sorry,
anyone else
did
who
I
could
speak
do
just
that.
too fast?
Not at all, not at all. You were just perfect as usual. And I know if I ever need any kind of support, you are the person I will come to. Thank you for just
So
breaking
nice
so
of
many
you.
myths. Thank you for just
Thank you.
breaking so many myths and giving us such practical suggestions. And thank you for your
Pleasure.
time. We know it's a crazy period of time right now, but thank you for
No,
doing this.
no, thank you for
Audience,
inviting me.
thank you, Parul. Thank you. Audience, we're opening this time up. If any of you have any questions, we can't see anything on the chat, but if any of you have any questions, we're going to leave the next 3 or 4 minutes open for you to write anything on the chat so that we can ask the panelists above for any kind of questions that you might have. Like we shared, we will be sharing videos with you. We will be sharing presentations with you. So this is enough for you to also share it with some of your team members. I do know that some of your team members have been wanting to join us. I'm sorry, our limit for the Zoom call was 100. We'll try to fix it or figure it out for next time. I apologize for that. Okay, Manika, just help us if there are any more questions that come in, and then we can take that forward. We've spent the first 1 hour very productively talking about mental health, and our next hour will be a lot more focused about physical health. I'm sure by now we figured we cannot work with either one of them, and we have to work with both of them together. I'm just going to open up the chat for 1 more minute if anyone has any other questions. Otherwise, we'll move to John. Manika, any questions? Radhika, any questions?
No, Varsha.
Okay, all right. So then we are good. Radhika, were you saying something?
I said we're good to go on, Varsha.
All right. Okay, good. So I'm going to then introduce this next speaker for today. His name is John Gloster. I think he's a man who doesn't need any kind of introduction. He's a physiotherapist, an Australian sport physiotherapist who's been doing this for 27 years of his life. He works with elite athletes, international sports team, as well as with the general sporting population. He's worked extensively with international cricket for the last 22 years. He sits actively on 3 advisory boards for school and health-related projects in Mumbai, in and across India as well. One of them actually being the Gateway School of Mumbai. We're extremely lucky to have him on board for our advisory board. John currently is the head of sports, science, medicine, and the board advisor of GoSports Foundation. I have interacted with John a few times in the past, and I have always been touched with his kindness and his humility. And I'm sure today he's just going to share a lot of practical aspects about just the positivity of physical health. John is not going to be sharing a PPT with us, but just sharing his thoughts. Thank you, John, for being on today.
Thank you all, actually, and you know it's a wonderful platform for us to just, you know, such great minds to put our heads together and come up with some solutions. And you know, it's been some incredibly diverse topics. You know, even though within the one subject so far, there's some great diversity out there already. And I think, you know, a lot of what I'm about to speak about, you know, a lot of the Gateway team have already spoken about, which shows that actually we're all on the same page in our approach, which I think is really, really important. Some of you may know of Paul Romer from Stanford Uni, who once said that, you know, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I think this crisis that we're in now is an opportunity for all of us to sort of take another look, stand back and sort of reevaluate where we're all heading, but also particularly with our children. So let's not waste this opportunity. Let's look at it as an opportunity to learn and to grow. And for me, it's an emphasis for me about placing it back onto physical activity, now more important, I think, than ever, given the current context. There's a survey out last week that I saw that came out of Italy, and you know, they've shown that the impact of, you know, this lockdown on children has to be considered with utmost urgency. It's shown that kids are becoming more irritable, trouble sleeping, become a lot more fearful, which is a big issue. But more worryingly is that you know, there's significant signs of developmental regression being noted in a lot of our kids. So that awareness has now been raised. So it's up to all of us. Side of it plays a very big role in sort of overcoming many of those issues. Thanks, Urvi and the Gateway team, for those wonderful practical tips that you put out there earlier. So I won't go into too much detail around the sort of practical side of why it's important. But it's been great to see, you know, how prominent a role exercise has played in the previous talks that we've already listened to, particularly as a remedy to so many problems. You know, for me, movement, physical education, physical activity should still be on the top of all our agendas for a number of the reasons that I'll be outlining in a minute. But I think actually now more than ever, this is the time that we need to be looking at the physical side of our sort of approach, particularly in the COVID context around immunity and things like that. So I don't think we've got the excuse anymore of not having enough time. I think the one thing we've got more than enough of at the moment is time, and we have time now to address or readdress the physical side of this whole equation. For our athletes and our cricketers, we're using the term quarantine, which really just means training and keeping active during lockdown. But the same thing should apply for all of us and all of our kids as well. Some of you will be familiar with Nelson Mandela, and he followed a really strict daily exercise routine for the 27 years that he was locked up in his little cell. And he said it was the key to his peace of mind, and exercise for him dissipated tension, and tension is the enemy of serenity. He said he found that he thought more clearly when he was physically fit. So I'm taking that mantra certainly to all our players and all our athletes, but particularly back to our kids as well. So the important message here is for our kids is that movement and physical activity has to be continued in whatever way, shape or form, particularly now in this current situation. My mantra has always been that movement is medicine. It's always been that, and always will continue to be so. I know this is a sort of a mantra that's taken forward by the Gateway School as well. And if any of you are familiar with Ken Robinson, he always alludes to this learning from the shoulders down concept. Always thought makes more sense to me than anything, but why? And the reason why is because movement is at the core of all our learning. And we've heard a little bit about in the previous talks as well, neuron development, language development, mental health, cognitive health, and of course our physical health is driven by movement. But also remember that physical education is not just sport. People think of it as being sport, and PE, I see it as supporting sport. So without developing what we call your fundamental skills and a larger movement vocabulary or curriculum within the brain, sport will never function. So let's get back and start looking at this as an opportunity to build on some of these supported, what we call fundamental movement activities. So I think schools and now the household needs to be supported even more in this quest to focus on exercise during school hours when the kids are at school, but now more importantly within the home, also during school hours if they're taking online lessons. So I think the aim is it's always been for me, is to use sports and physical activity to make durable people. I think that's the need of the hour. And again, we've heard that in previous conversations about how durable are we today. And this is a great opportunity to use something to make more durable people, but also to make our kids more durable. I think it's also an opportunity for us to make kids motivated to move for life. So therefore, the early experiences they have of sport and play and movement must be fun. It has to be rewarding. It has to be challenging. And it has to have an involvement with friendships and connection. So there's a key message here to all our physical educators, our physical education programs. They need to encapsulate and incorporate all those pieces to keep kids engaged. And the other thing is around confidence. I think the aim of sports and to have what we call physically literate children is to build confidence in children. And I think that's one of the biggest gifts that you can give to a child is the gift of confidence. So for me, confidence comes from movement. And if any of you are familiar with the physical literacy expert from Canada called Dean Crilliers, his whole world effectively is built around this whole thing of confidence. And he describes confidence as built on a fun yet challenging pathway that incorporates successes and failures. So therefore, we're encouraging almost trial and error to be involved in this process. And on the back of that, you have to remember, if a child only has successes in something, that can be sport or academics or anything, then you'll eventually lose them to that sport or activity. But similarly, if they only have failures in life, we'll also lose them there as well. So it's therefore important to provide challenges for our kids, and that could be in the sporting field or wherever, that are not too hard, but also not too easy. But ultimately, fun comes from learning something new and getting better at it all the time. So I think this is a perfect opportunity for all of us through our programming and through our abilities, through the institution, particularly like Gateway, is to work on these fundamental movement skills, to build that motor competence vocabulary that we talked about earlier. This is an opportunity to work on building a greater diverse movement vocabulary in all of our kids. The structured sport side can wait. This is the building opportunity that precedes structured sport. And I think that's the bit that we've missed also in a lot of the school curriculums is only focusing on the sport and not the foundations that are required for sport, but also for life. And we've only got a limited time frame in a child's life to develop what we call this motor competence, to develop their physical literacy skills. And that's really only from the ages of about 3 till about 11 years of age. Beyond that, it's very, very difficult to acquire them. So we have an opportunity now, we have the time now to lay the foundations of motor competence right here and right now. We talk about stress and lifestyle at the moment and the changes there. Again, more relevant than ever, possibly than before. Stress, we all know, lowers immunity, raises cortisol. We need to address that. We need to recognize it within our kids. We need to recognize it within ourselves. And we've covered some of that in the previous talks as well. But the other point that was raised before was fear. And fear also lowers immunity and can be a precursor to getting ill. But I think the brilliant counter to fear is fun. And I've always talked about fun tends to push fear to the periphery. So when we're having fun, you know, and I think exercise and movement can be that. If they're fun, engaging activities for kids, then that is one way to push fear to the periphery. And I think it's a great distraction therapy as well. So we use it in sport. We talk about having fun and pushing fear to the outside.
John,
so
this is your 1 minute warning.
Sure. So as we talked about before, the physical mental health link, we can't ignore that, particularly in the current context. Sport, physical activity is critical, it's essential. I think we need to just recognize as parents that we've probably now taken over as the key stakeholder in this whole equation. You know, I'm seeing the parent now as the physical educator in this system, given the kids are now in the home environment. So we need to educate the parent about why physical activity should still be on the table. We also have to listen to our marketplace, in this case, the parent. What is the number one, you know, thing on their agenda? And I'm pretty certain it's safety and health of their children. And how do we solve that for them? And again, exercise comes to the fore as soon as I talk about that as well. So science tells us that exercise helps learning. How many institutions are actually embracing and appreciating that science? Gateway definitely has. It's just that now we have to take it out of the school environment and bring it into the home environment. So I'll probably leave it there, but my whole point there really is to let's not forget exercise. Let's not forget movement, and let's bring certainly the home environment, now controlled more by perhaps the parent, into the open, but be open to strategies from the institutions such as Gateway that we've already seen, but be very open to those as parents, because we know the benefit by your kids being engaged in movement and physical activities at this point in time.
Thank you, John. Thank you for sharing this so honestly and so clearly with us. I think everyone, you'll be actually quite proud of us. After we've come back from the lockdown, the team has worked a lot to ensure that they are doing, all our students are doing some physical movement with the kids as well. I hope they even start doing something with us. But thank you so much for so openly sharing this with us. We appreciate you being on the panel today. Thanks, John.
Pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you. We're going to now move to our next panel.
Of questions coming in for the mental health part of the panel. I just wanted to share with participants that we will address them, but at the next section, right?
Yes, we'll do them all together at the end now. Okay. And then we can open it up to any panelists. Thanks, Radhika. I'm going to introduce our next panelist to you. Her name's Mahek Uttamchandani. She's also one of my closest friends. She is a pediatric and a neonatal occupational therapist. She runs a center for children with special needs called Stepping Stones in Bandra. She's a consultant OT at the Harkrishan Das Reliance Hospital, and she has been practicing since the last 14 years. She's also associated with a lot of schools and organizations and as a team head for rehabilitation services. She is a very dear colleague, and I absolutely love how she keeps upgrading her knowledge. And she also loves to look at the child holistically and work with a multidisciplinary approach. Thank you, Mahek, for being a part of our panelists today. Over to you.
Hi, Varsha, and hi, everybody. And thank you so much, Gateway School, for giving me this opportunity and inviting me here to just share my perspective today. I think a lot of what I will be speaking about today has already been addressed by the previous speaker. So I'm just going to reiterate and just add maybe a few things here and there. Can we just go to the next slide, please? Okay, so when Varsha, told me about this panel discussion, I said, well, this is really something that needs to be addressed. I'm not only going to tell you what are the two things that work for me, but I'm also going to tell you a little bit about my own journey and my own practice through this pandemic. So like Varsha said, when the pandemic arrived, for us too, around the 16th of March, most private clinics that provide services to children we had started shutting down because ours are a highly contact environment and you're constantly in touch with people, and the children that we work with are also a very, very vulnerable population. So we obviously decided to keep it safe for everybody, and we started shutting down services. So we all know that this pandemic has got a lot of fear, anxiety, panic, anger, frustration, loss. People have lost their loved ones. There's been a lot of death. For a lot of people, it's become a situation where they're failing to thrive because of the economic problems and a lot of isolation. Now, isolation is not just physical, but also social isolation. We go to the next slide, please. So when obviously the pandemic was announced and we had to shut down, I had to shut down my private clinical services, but I was still continuing services on the neonatal unit. Now on the neonatal unit, my role is that of a developmental specialist. So we had to continue providing care to the babies that were born, either preterm or high risk. So a couple of things that were emerging were that, okay, so parents were now a lot more anxious. They were wondering about what is the new normal going to be? Are we going to be allowed to, come see the little ones? But there were other things that were happening in the home environment as well. So we were now working from home. We had new roles. So parents were now not just parents, they were also educators. We were having to deal with the whole business of online schools and learning. There was social distancing, and there were new norms for functioning. So a lot of panic, a lot of anxiety. The previous speakers have already, said these things, and I'm just reiterating that yes, this pandemic is not something that we were ready for. It was not something that anyone has experienced before, and that's why we had to learn as we go. Now, in times like this, obviously, it is survival of the fittest. And this is where your resilience and your own mental health sort of comes in. We go to the next slide. So what really worked for us is what I'm going to be reiterating. I think John has already emphasized a lot on movement, and also the previous speakers have been talking about why movement and physical activity and physical exercise is very, very important. So honestly, when I was asked to come and speak at the panel, this is the title that I wanted to give. Movement is the ultimate mood stabilizer. We do know that exercises and physical activities produce endorphins, which are chemicals in the brain that act like natural painkillers. Now, just as a little background on some other work that I do, I am also an educational kinesiologist. And that, when we say educational kinesiology, it's basically educating the client about his own physical and mental being, and then working towards goal-directed activity. So when we do a lot of work in educational kinesiology, we look at a body-mind connection. We do not believe that the body is isolated from the mind. And this is where, it would be a good platform to speak about it, because I think the previous speakers have been saying that it is very, very important that now more than ever, we not just be physically active, but also mindful. Another thing that a lot of parents started addressing with us, especially because now therapy was also going to be online, is that kids are sitting in front of screens for way too long. And that's where we started looking at how we can balance online and offline activity. I know a lot of our kids work and function around routines. So obviously new routines had to be set. We had to think about ways of how we can balance the different kind of online and offline activities. We were also thinking about sedentary versus active lifestyles. And like, previous speakers have been saying, that, you know, it's not just about finding space to work out or exercise, but also just indulging in basic stuff in and around the house. So getting your children involved in basic chores, or, you know, getting them to do little things to help you around the house. This is also something that we were thinking about. Can you go to the next slide, please? I found this very interesting quote a couple of days ago, and this is something that I've been, you know, sort of reiterating and repeating to the parents who have been doing online sessions with us. I'm just going to read this out for you. I find it very, very interesting. Kids must be regulated before they can learn. Adults must be regulated before they can teach. An adult's anger, frustration, and punishments often stem from the adult becoming dysregulated while reacting to a dysregulated child's behavior. A dysregulated adult trying to control a dysregulated kid often ends poorly. Taking the time to get regulated will prevent power struggles and strengthen relationships. We already know that being within the confines of the home and being in front of each other all day is causing a lot of struggle. We're all lacking some sort of mental and physical space from each other. And this is a time to now become mindfully self-compassionate as well. So there can be times in the day when your child will, you know, really be in your hair, and you will need to, you know, take that time off for yourself and give yourself that time out. Because if you're going to be dysregulated, you're, you know, not going to be in the best optimal position to sort of regulate or take care of your child. And this is something that, you know, I see very, very closely, even when I work on the neonatal unit. So we know that from early infant and baby behavior as well, that a parent and a child relationship is often about co-regulation. So if you really feel that your children are getting dysregulated at this time, sometimes it's also a good idea to just check in with yourself and see, is this something that, you know, I'm sort of transferring to the child? The only way to regulate a dysregulated child would be number one, to ground yourself and to regulate yourself, and then look at what you can do to handle the child's situation. And that's where the mindfulness piece of my talk comes in. And why mindfulness? I mean, we all know the benefits of mindfulness. Mindfulness as a definition, when we talk about mindfulness, it is about just grounding yourself in the moment. And now more than ever, we need to be doing that. We're mindlessly consuming information that's coming from the internet, looking at news channels, and we don't even know when and how this anxiety and fear and frustration is building up inside our bodies. It is very, very important that we now start calculating what is really needed, what is really going to be helpful, and what's not. Other than that, like I read day before yesterday, I did another webinar, and we talked about self-compassion. I think, you know, a lot has been said about use this time, you know, to be productive, learn a new skill, learn a new hobby, and things like that. But I also feel if you just, you know, make it through the day feeling all right and overcoming your fears and struggles, I think it's fine. So let's just all, you know, calm down a little bit and also see why it is important to show some self-compassion. Yes, it is important to be compassionate towards the others. This is a time that we need to be there for each other more than ever, but it is also a good time to show some compassion to yourself. We just go to the last bit. There are a lot of mindfulness strategies. Obviously, there's a lot of resources for parents available online. But I've just put this little slide here, and, you know, it talks about how children can take, do these certain mindfulness exercises just to sort of bring themselves in the moment and calm themselves down. So doing things like counting to 5, taking a deep breath, blowing into your hands, placing hands in your pocket, acknowledging antecedents to anger. So this is again something that we do a lot with kids, especially now during this lockdown period, because a lot of behavioral challenges have been reported. So a lot of kids who've been doing online sessions with us, parents are like, you know, there's a lot of irritability, there's increased aggression, there's poor compliance, there's defiance and things like that. So we're just teaching children to check in with themselves and just have some sort of emotional grounding. And when we talk about emotional grounding, we're also talking about children just learning to recognize what they're feeling. Very often when you're seeing children acting out, when you start seeing a lot of behavioral concerns, when you start seeing a lot of aggression and anger, impatience, inattention, there is always and always something underlying happening at the emotional level. And it's important because a lot of children don't really check in with themselves emotionally to see what they're really feeling. So helping a child recognize his feelings is the number one way to first, and then teaching him more meaningful ways of addressing his emotions. And that's where also you can use a lot of the mindfulness strategies to help him cope.
Mahek, this is your 1 minute warning.
Yeah, I'm almost done. And very importantly, I think also this is a great time to not just teach children about mindfulness, compassion, importance of movement, learning to balance an active versus a sedentary lifestyle. But I think it's also a good time to talk to them about resilience. We all know that human beings as a race are pretty resilient and we bounce back no matter what. And most of us are like that. But for children, this is something that has to be taught or something that has to be addressed. And this is a good time to sort of tell them that, you know, this is something that we are going to overcome. There is a lot of anxiety in children as well, which is probably something that they're not being able to express. And that's what I have seen personally in my own practice, that children are not able to express the anxiety. This is a difficult time, not just for us as adults, but even for children. So be aware of your child's behavior, be aware of your child's emotions. If you feel that there's any sort of anxiety, reach out to your therapist, reach out to, get some professional help. Because sometimes it is these, the emotional upheaval or the anxiety or the fear or the frustration of not being able to go out, of not having to do the things that you were otherwise doing, which is causing the behavioral concerns. So this is honestly, these were the features that I wanted to highlight. I think everything else has been, that's it from me. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Thank you very much. We'll wait for the questions. Anyone has any questions, please write to us and we'll answer them in the last 15 minutes. But thank you for such a practical guide with so many strategies about what can we do. I know whenever we've been talking in the last 3 months, we've always been talking about, but why is a particular child behaving in a certain way? And I'm glad you could address this here. I'm sorry for the lack of time, but thank you for being with us today and sharing this with us, Mahek. Thank you. I'm going to introduce our next panelist to you. He's Mr. John Banta. He is a teacher from the Gateway School of New York. You are right. He is awake way earlier than his timing just to be with us today. Sorry about that, John. He is a lower school teacher at Gateway New York and has been with them since 2006. He works with the lower school over there. During distance learning, he has discovered ways to modify and transport what is accomplished in a physical schoolhouse to an online medium. Through trial and error and collaboration with the team, he has found success in developing meaningful problem solving and fun social development opportunities in something that they call as Grandstand for children and also to support classroom teachers. Thank you, John, for being a part of this. Over to you.
All right, thank you and happy to be here. First things first, anybody that's available, scooch back for a hot second and put both thumbs up. Turn your thumbs over, cross your thumbs, and clasp your hands. Bring them up to your chest. Breathe in through your nose once, and out through your mouth. In through your nose, out through your mouth, in through your nose, and out through your mouth. Roll your hands back out, unclasp your fingers, hop your thumbs back over, turn them up, and put them in your lap. All right, everyone can scooch back. I'm glad we all got to do something together on the screen. As you see, the title of my presentation is Shattering Screens, Teaching to Zoom and Zooming to Teach. I should probably begin by saying that over the course of Zoom, none of the children that I worked with actually shattered their screens. I did find ways in this weird box to all connect, and when we wanted to be in the same space and be able to touch and be around each other so badly, and it was so frustrating, we still developed fun ways to make it feel like It seems like we're in school. Next slide, please. Structure. Somebody has mentioned it before, just a little while ago, with relation to the idea of regulation. Now, the picture on your screen is of Ms. Elizabeth Freitas. She is the founding teacher of the Gateway School of New York. And long ago, she would say, if it were not for the banks, a river would lose its course. Now, before distance learning, I assumed that I was the banks, the children were the river, and it was my job alone. What I've learned in working with the children over the computer as they let me into their homes and I had them come into mine, there are riverbanks everywhere. It is moms, it is dads, it is babysitters, it is older brothers, it is sisters. Sometimes it's the family pet on a rough afternoon. Next slide, please. I really do believe dream work. As a teacher, when I'm getting ready to teach a class in person, it's really no different, I've discovered, than when I'm getting ready to teach a class online. I need to make sure that my partner teacher and I have talked about all the possibilities that might happen during that call. If somebody's going to have a hard time, which one of us is going to take care of it? If we know a youngster has had something really exciting like a birthday happening in that household, are we going to make a plan to put aside whatever it is we thought we were going to learn that day and let in that birthday, let in that excitement? Absolutely. But we can only do it by making that plan together and making sure that we do it before we let the children in the room, be it at school or on the computer. Next slide, please. Here's what we're up against. This computer screen right here. And it has some dimensional limitations. I realized the other day when I got up and walked over to the other side of the room that what I was looking at, the children had never seen. I realized from that point on, I needed to start to pick this thing up and bring it around with me a little bit more, because here I'm flatter than a piece of paper. But I also realized I needed to let the children do that too. So ideas like, hey, would you like to take a turn to take your laptop, iPad outside and show us what the weather is, became huge ideas for the kids and huge opportunities to take turns getting up, moving, positioning a screen so that he or she could effectively be seen, and then returning back to base. The idea that what I'm doing, the children can also do is important. They love watching us do it, but they love even more to take turns doing it themselves. Next. Our routines. Let me tell you, even more important online than in the schoolhouse are these routines. It has been difficult, especially with all the nuts and craziness going on, but making sure that when I say class starts at 8 o'clock or this activity is happening at this or so-and-so time, it has to happen at that time. Even if I have to set multiple alarms to make sure that I remember that that happens. Because children right now are dependent upon adults to help them maintain that structure of the day. If they don't have to worry because Mr. Banta has said, we're doing this at such and such, or my turn is coming just after, if they can count on that, that is one less thing they have to worry about, and then they can focus on the learning and the fun. Next slide, please. I help students to see the boundaries. Not unlike a crossing guard, not unlike a sign in the middle of the street, because there's a lot of activity happening on screens, in life, here, there, and young boys and girls don't always see all the signals that tell them, I need to stop or I need to go forward. It's my job as the adult to not only point out those signs to them, but to also give them strategies for remembering. The next time I see this, what am I going to do? And we spend a lot of time sitting as a group on Zoom, tapping our chins, thinking, using a couple of extra moments, and then coming to a decision together. This is not something that boys and girls arrive at real quickly. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of trial and error, and a lot of time just thinking. Next slide, please. The hurdles, the rough stuff. And I don't just mean when the internet crashes and the entire class is sent into Zoom land. I have to look at the calendar and I have to think about not only exciting events, I have to think about the day of the week. If it's Thursday and we have no school on a Friday, or if we're headed into a 3-day weekend, or if somebody's gotten a new pet, or a new baby or brother or sister has been born in the household. They're not necessarily hurdles, but there are things that I'm going to have to help all of the children on the group call jump over, land on the other side of with an understanding of what's new and different so that we can all move on. Different boys and girls need different amounts of time to prepare themselves to surmount an idea, to take an idea in, or to face a challenge. It is my job to look ahead and predict as many of those events as possible that are coming our way so that I can start getting myself ready to get them ready. Next slide, please.
John, this is your 2-minute warning.
Thank you. I practice paying attention. Now, at this point in time, I'm pretty good at reading an online screen. I can tell when somebody has walked off because they need to use the bathroom and haven't remembered to tell me, or when they've gotten distracted by perhaps the new Lego toy that mom or dad just dropped and it just happens to be so nearby. I have to see all of that, and I have to get really good at figuring out when to come in and say, hey, buddy, come back over here, and when to let it go. But most importantly, I need to practice every day seeing all of it. And in that way, I learn to be comfortable with who needs less screen time, who needs to get up and step away a couple more times than the rest. And I have to just make peace with that myself. Next slide, please. A model of self-regulation. If I'm wacky, the boys and girls are going to be wacky. But if I'm sitting, if I'm thinking about my voice, if I'm thinking about either how close or how far I'm sitting from the screen, I have the opportunity to be the thermostat on the computer that helps the boys and girls find, oh, that's the model. That's how I can be. And in that way, I get them to come towards what I'm doing, think about the things that I would like them to think about, and become essentially an important thing on the screen, something that they want to look at. Next slide, please. I adjust my use of language. I'll say this very simply. Sometimes I don't talk too much at all. Next slide, please. And I am flexible always. If the internet goes out, if somebody's having a bad day, that's all right, because it's not going to stay that way. You can only stretch so far before needing to come back to base. And that applies to physical activity, the stretch of the mind, thinking about something new. We can go so far and then we come back and we're done for that day. We'll come back to the ideas the next time. Next slide, please. Last, but most importantly, I forgive my own mistakes because I'm making them every day. And if I were keeping a litany or a list of everything I've done wrong, I would never be able to get over it and move on to doing something better. However, in forgiving my own mistakes, I have to remember what went wrong so that the next time it's on me. I'm the adult in the room. I need to make sure that we don't repeat what hasn't worked, and we think about ways to make everything better always. I believe that's
Thank you
my
very
last
much,
slide.
John.
Thank you.
I think so too. Manika, is that the last slide? Rudri, is that the last slide? It is the last slide. Thank you, John. I have made so many notes while you've been sharing this. Thank you so much for sharing this so calmly. I
Thank
think
you.
just the exercise initially just got all of us pumped up as well. And thank you for just sharing such useful tips. I will always remember from henceforth that I'm the adult in the room. Thank you. Waking you up again. Thank you.
Oh, I'm
Give
here.
us 10 more minutes. We have a last panelist and then we open to question and answers. Thank you. So our last speaker for today is Vivek Kumar. Vivek Kumar is the co-founder and the CEO of Shamtale Foundation. He's supporting communities to revive the spirit of living in schools and outside. He works a lot with government schools as well. Core to his program is a curriculum that provides space for self-directed learning, system thinking, and mindfulness. Vivek today is going to share with us a whole different perspective about kids that might not be as privileged as the others. And I'm going to hand this over to him. Thank you, Vivek, for being a part of our panelists today. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be part of this. The best thing about going last is that you know what not to speak. And the worst thing about going last is now you don't know what to speak because a lot has been said already. But I'll still try. Manika is taking some time to get the right PPT, Manika.
Yes, I think Rudri is fixing that for us.
Sorry, Rudri, yeah, sorry. You were on my screen, so I kind of got a bit confused. So yeah, while Rudri puts the PPT, I have a short preamble before I start. Resilience is a buzzword these days, and I'm going to speak a lot about resilience. It is something to be happy about because everyone is suddenly talking about it. But something also quite concerning is that resilience is not a campaign. It's not an event. It should not be coming up once in a while, but it should be embedded as a way of life. Also, I feel this is not something which is limited to one section of society. To quote a very recent example, I'm not sure how many of us are a big fan of tennis. It is not something which happens with children or adults or adults belonging to privileged society. John McEnroe, who's a famous tennis player in 1981. I'm not sure how many of you can recall this incident. He said during the match, "You can't be serious, man. You can't be serious." And a person who's a champion, right? Who's a legend, who I'm sure must have gone through all this kind of training, mental training, physical training to have achieved what he achieved in his life. But that moment when you don't pause can affect your both professional and personal outcomes. So the point I'm trying to drive through this example, that it's not something which is waiting to happen. It is happening in every moment, and we all can succumb to that moment no matter how trained we are. The other point I wanted to share before I begin my sharing is that I don't know why John did not use PPT. I was so happy when Varsha asked for a PPT. It always some extra work, and and John did a fantastic work of doing such a sleek PPT. I personally believe that, PowerPoints are extremely powerful, but at times they don't hold any point. So I want to drive that as well, but still I'm using a. And the last thing before I start the presentation is the concern that I have personally with mental health, and I'm slightly being provocative and testing the audience resilience as well, is that, it has become very prescriptive. You should do this, you should do that. And if you look at academic health or, a maths health or a science health, children can't do well if you just continue telling them, why don't you do well in maths? You should do well in maths. You should read a lot more maths. You should mug all the formulas. But, children with right kind of practice, consistency, and the formulas and the tools, are able to do a lot more consistently. The concern with mental health and resilience is that, as much as it is kind of, driven by practices, there's also a whole lot of science. And I think prescription at times has a lot of also influence on the self-esteem. So I hope that, while going ahead as educators, we see how we can embed all these practices and see more of as a science and be less prescriptive. Thank you so much. I'm going to talk about how do we cultivate resilience. I'm not an expert on resilience, but I'm a student of resilience. As an entrepreneur, I need it every day, especially when things are not going my way. I'm going to focus a lot more on the work that we do. We are Shamtale, grateful to Gateway School. We work with children coming from economically marginalized sections. I've thought a lot about this, because they also have certain privileges that we don't have, really coping up with things in ways that we can't imagine. But definitely they don't have access to resources that they would like to, or which will help them enrich their own life. Next slide. This is a very important slide, and I would like to hear from other panelists as well. Moving from learned helplessness, and why this word is very significant, especially in the areas that we work. It's very key to resilience, because when you are exposed to similar kind of adversity over a long period of time, you kind of assume that there's nothing you can do about it. There are examples of putting a frog in not a boiling water, but you start entering the temperature slowly and the frog doesn't respond. And with human beings, especially children living in areas where there are very limited resources, we develop something called learned helplessness. We just stop responding. We'll think that we can't control things. And that's why it's important to kind of cultivate resilience. It is there in all the human beings, but cultivating, and then people are able to harvest that when they need it. And how we have kind of understood resilience. There are different ways in which people define it. How quickly we recover from the hijack state. We are going to talk about the hijack state, emotional hijack. Capacity to recover quickly from difficult, adapting well in the face of adversity, just not coping well, but also responding. Next slide. I've been listening to a lot of panelists, and especially schools, when it got closed, there was certain shift in moving from learning to learning mediums. What could be the medium? How do we use Zoom? How do we use WhatsApp? Without realizing that 70% of the country that I belong to still doesn't have either access to internet or devices. And what it does a lot of harm to child self-esteem. Because what we heard children going to their parents saying, hey, we are running behind the curriculum. And if there is a phone, it's phone for 4 children, and that too screen is very small. And the question that children were asking in the areas that we work, the struggle is learning to survive versus surviving to learn. And when we started listening to them, what are the questions they were asking? Why is there no food? How do you focus on learning new skills when the survival is at stake? Exams, yay, no exams. A lot of children I know that, they have been quite happy with the exams being postponed. What has happened? They were really missing their friends. How long this is going to happen? How to complete course? Why to complete course? Has the course ever been helpful? Now that we are at home, what are the things that we have learned can be useful to us? Why is no one going to work? Now, in middle of this kind of, responding to this and building connections before we move to curriculum was very tough for us, because these children were dealing with multiple adversities at the same time. This is not something that they are quite used to. And as John said that, we are the adults and we need to take responsibility of this. Next slide. And why COVID? As the next slide, as it takes time to come, why COVID? I'm going to share a conversation before COVID, because resilience is something that, COVID might have exposed the need of it, but it was always something which I felt was as important as, if not more important than literacy and numeracy, which we have been quite ballistic about. This is a conversation just before school got closed. Stop talking in the classroom. If you continue talking, I will send you out of the class. The child waits for a moment because the rest of the classroom starts laughing, and he gets up and says, "You meet me outside the class, I will thrash you." I'm talking about a government school system where the relationship between teacher and students can be quite tense and critical. And look at the child who's reflecting, "Oh no, my friend felt threatened and got hijacked by amygdala." Now, do we all get hijacked by amygdala? Of course we do get, right? Because it is something that is very important, and it is something which is part of the reptilian brain, and it was required because earlier it was all about life and death. Now it is not. I am not really worried if I will get killed the next moment, right? But I am really worried about my psychological safety, insecurity. So if someone laughs at me, I feel threatened, then amygdala gets active. Next slide.
Vivek, this is your 2-minute warning.
Thank you. I hope my amygdala doesn't get activated right now and get threatened. Yeah, next slide, please. And then you start engaging with prefrontal cortex, right? This audience is quite, equipped with this kind of language. The moment you take a pause and next to the child comes, "I'm sorry, sir, I got very angry." And wow, my friend took a pause and reflected. And the best way I feel, and something that I have practiced, what John also said, is the key to building resilience is focusing on your sensation, labeling your emotion. And by the time you invest this time, you will have a better way to respond. Next, please. This is during COVID when the teacher went with the learning packs and food and relief material. The child said, "Sir, why don't you come and have tea with me?" And teacher says, "No, I need to go and rush to other students as well." And the child says, "No, come, sir, you will not have corona. We are taking precautions. Come, let's have tea." And it seems the friend has been expanding his well-being zone. And it's so amazing. Next, please. The next slide already has been discussed, how reactivity blocks resilience and receptivity builds it. We always are in that green zone, which is zone of well-being. The idea is to expand through the tools, through body literacy, through practicing attention. That's so key. Next slide. I've already shared about the context. We work in areas where literacy rate is so low that they can't engage with written content. Next slide. These are the 4 C's we adopted: being curious, what's happening with the child; developing connection; showing care. Right? And this is the last slide. You can go to next. Next, Rudri, you can go to next. Because we're on a Zoom call, I will take 30 more seconds to see that, what we have been also talking about. Just wait a moment, Rudri. We're also talking about, working on developing well-being. What we realized is that, well-being can't be separated from maths and science and their day-to-day living. Because when a child comes across a situation, it is very difficult for them to segregate that, I need to work on my well-being. The whole problem comes in once, and he or she deals with the environment as a whole. So if Rudri, you can just play, is it possible on that PPT? If you can go to the last slide, it's 30 seconds. I'm sure you will enjoy. You will.
That's fine. We can do that. We can.
Yeah.
Rudri, you can just go ahead, please.
If it would have been YouTube live, you couldn't have played, but this is something that I'm sure everyone will appreciate. So we have integrated the whole program, and we have said it's important to integrate the well-being component into the storytelling format, because this is what students relate to. It's important to build relatability. A slide before this. Yeah, can you play? It is a radio cast on, yeah. Can you go behind? Rudri, can you play? These are all 10, yeah. Now the slide number 11.
It doesn't play.
It's not playing. If you can go on that button and play, it's not playing.
Vivek, do you want to do this from your side? You can share your screen if you want and you can play it.
If you could enable the screen sharing, I know it's taking a bit of time, but trust me, it would be worth it. If you could enable screen sharing.
Sure. Manika's done. Okay. You can go ahead and share your. You can go ahead
Thank
and
you
share.
so much. I really appreciate the patience.
No problem. Take your time.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Can you, is it audible?
No, we can't hear that.
Now?
At least no.
Is it not audible?
No.
It's
Now
not.
it is. It is.
Sorry, is it still not audible?
We can hear you, Vivek. We can hear the bite. Let it go.
Okay.
याद करते हैं जो पल हमने अपने दोस्तों के साथ बिताया.
So it starts with integrating well-being, and then it's important that what they were missing the most was the connection with their friends. So we kind of integrated that with short stories.
भिक्कू को देखकर खुश हो गया और बोला, अरे वाह भिक्कू, आज तुझे देखकर बड़ी खुशी मिल रही है, पर यह बताओ कि आप दोनों हमसे पहले कैसे आए? यह सुनकर सलमा ने बोला, तुम भूल गए क्या? आज मैडम हमें कहानी सुनाने वाली है.
Then there are simple activities.
पहला कोशिश का कार्य, एकल परिवार, संयुक्त परिवार. तो दोस्तों, आज हमने यह सीखा कि जिन घरों में आई, बापू और उनके बच्चे रहते हैं, उसको एकल परिवार कहते हैं. और जिन घरों
And the most important was to build the element of culture in the whole thing, because culture is something which a child relates to and needs a sense of security during this time. So we integrated songs.
दोस्तों के बिना मेरी सुनी सुनी लाइफ, दोस्त ही तो बोलो कैसे गुजरेगा ये टाइम, घूमना फिरना पहाड़ चढ़ना कैसे होगा ये, ओ मेरे यार तुझे ढेर सारा प्यार, ओ मेरे यार तुझे ढेर सारा प्यार.
And then we end with a riddle, just to kind of engage.
परिवार के साथ कमरे में सो रही थी, उसे बहुत मच्छर काट रहे थे, उसने लाइट बंद कर दी. तभी अंधेरे में उसे एक जुगनू आता दिखाई दिया और वो चिल्ला कर बोली,
होशियार, मच्छर टॉर्च लेके आ रहा है.
Yeah, so what we identified, the key is to identify and label emotions, at the same time build connection with the context and feel more secure, because that allows you to engage with the part of brain which is important for resilience. So with that, thank you so much, and thank you for being patient.
Thank you very, very much, Vivek. It's a very different perspective. Thank you for being so passionate about it and sharing it with us. I know you were the last speaker, but it just really has woken us all up, and it's just so interactive. And thank you for your enthusiasm. Absolutely love the audio bites as well. Thank you all for being here. I know we've crossed the time limit a little bit. I would just request you if you can be on for the next 5 minutes. Radhika is just going to share a poll. We just would like to take feedback to understand how is this platform working. Radhika, if you can share the poll with us, it's going to take a minute for you, and then we'll open it up to questions. Thank you, Radhika. Just going to give this 5 more seconds. Radhika, just give me a heads up when we're good.
Couldn't complete the poll, it just disappeared.
It disappeared after about 10 seconds.
Yeah, it disappeared after the third question.
Yeah.
Radhika, do you want to share with us or?
Can you see the poll now?
Yes. Just give it a minute. We still have around half of people still filling, so we're just going to give this 30 seconds more. Okay, Radhika, I think we're good with this. Thank you. Okay. So thank you for doing that, Radhika, for us. Thank you, panelists. A very, very rich discussion. Lots of conversations, lots of things to take back home. I know a lot has changed with just my understanding about different things. We're going to open the floor right now for question and answers. I just really want to thank you all for spending your Thursday afternoon here with us. We do want to keep doing this periodically, and we will update you next time for our next topic. Hopefully, we'll find a resource that can help us have more people on the Zoom call. Also, maybe streamline it on Facebook and Instagram. We're still finding out new ways with tech, so give us some time and bear with us for that. Thank you, Mariam, for recording this. Manika, for being a lovely timekeeper. Rudri, for sharing everything that you are doing with your screen and just ensuring that this goes smoothly. And Radhika, Indira, everyone else who's just been a part of everything else. Thank you, guys. We have 2 or 3 questions that are coming up that I'll share that. Suresh, your question mainly has to do with children who do not come from privileged backgrounds and in the non-profit section as well. I assume this question was asked before and Vivek has answered that. If you still have a question, please throw it back to us and we can help you answer that as well. Okay, so I'll give students time to write down. The next question that we have is, what about children with special needs? They're most affected in present times. That's right, we are a school as well that works with special needs, and we've shared a lot of resources with you as well. This all will also be shared, like I said earlier, on YouTube and our presentations. But Anirudh, I think if you have a specific question, feel free to just ask us, or you can just even ask it here in the panel. Okay, the next question is, can you please share more thoughts on virtual parent support groups? Manika, I'll let you answer that question. Manika?
Yes.
Would you like to answer that question? Hello?
Varsha, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yes. Okay.
You can go ahead and answer that.
I don't know how much you heard. So I was just sharing, this is the first time we're going to be taking it virtual. And I think for us, the parent support group space is a space where our parents come together and create that sense of community. They lean on each other. And for us as the counselors at school, we're just there to facilitate and kind of provide some structure for that space. So what we're hoping to do that is virtually also help create that social community, because for so many of our parents, this has been challenging in ways that we can't even imagine. So we're hoping that they will come together. We're looking at a structure where it will be part open, where sharing and problem solving and learning from each other can happen. And we're thinking about games and activities that can also help facilitate that bonding piece. So we'll be doing our first one in July. So we will have more to share after that.
All right. Thanks, Manika. We have two people who have asked me, how are we sharing this? Mariam, can you please come online and just share with everyone, how do we do this?
Yeah, can you hear me, Varsha?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to we will have the entire recording of the entire session, the 2-hour session, after which I'll be editing it down to specific speaker clips as well. So, you know, you can pick and choose when you want to watch which, because I don't know how many people have the capacity to watch 2 hours. That should be ready in about a week, 10 days. We've got we've got consent from all speakers, almost all speakers, that we can put this on our YouTube channel and social media. So thank you for that. And as soon as we have the clips ready, we will share them with you.
Thank you, Mariam. The next question is for Mahek. Mahek, could you please help us answer? Please give us some OT tips on how to reduce the power struggle between parents and ADHD children.
Okay, so just to begin with, I want to say that we're in this situation which is not so typical. Like some of the speakers have highlighted, that there is a dire need to be very, very flexible at the moment. Our children are also going through a lot of internal turmoil, and that's where whatever has worked previously might look like it's not going to work anymore. So when parents first sort of, address this with me, one of the things I ask them to do is, let's just slow down a little bit and let's revisit and see what could be priority goals. I think number one thing is that it's also important to, at this point in time, within the context of the home, prioritize what are the things that you need to address. Yeah, so it can be a very overwhelming situation where we need to look into a lot of things. Given the current scenario, we have, to look at online learning. They must be into routines. They must participate in, household routines, etc. So I think one of the things that we've tried, and it really works well, is passing on or giving some control off to the child himself. So I tell the parents, why don't you actively involve the child in sort of, say, make a routine or a timetable for himself, where we can have a mix of preferred and non-preferred activities sort of listed down. It all again boils down to us as adults trying to, maintain and reiterate structure in the house situation. Like I also said, with the ADHD child, if there is a lot of, aggression, or if you're seeing a lot of behaviors that are now stemming from the emotional uncertainty in these unprecedented times, it would be a good place to start with just helping the child emotionally ground himself, regulate himself, and then, sit down. So it's really worked very well. If you involve the child, give him a choice of activities and let him stick to his own routine. When you're passing on some control to the child, you're also engaging him in the process of being accountable and responsible for the choices he's made. So for example, if through the day, we have certain activities or classes or, things that have been picked by the child, that's a choice he's made. That's where we're giving him the power to also be accountable for what he's
chosen. And obviously always, if you have a preferred activity, you also always want to follow that up with a non-preferred one. So it's not like a bribe situation, but it's more like, okay, once get done through the day. Also incorporating movement, because movement is a great regulator. So make sure your child's getting enough movement, activity, some form of activity. If your child's already working with a therapist, it would be a good idea to just, also get some feedback from there. Because certainly what we were doing with the child when, in the pre-COVID time, where the context was very different, the priorities and the problems were very different, those goals have to be revisited. I mean, this is again something that we've been talking a lot with parents. We've actually revisited goals and objectives of every child, and that holds true for every child with ADHD as well. I think
Thank you, Mahek. Thank you very much. I think if anyone does want to touch base with you as well, if anyone wants to touch base with any of the panelists, just write back to me and I will ask the panelists if they're open to taking more questions, or maybe, speak to you personally, and we can then take that forward or consult with you personally. Thank you. Reshma, this question is for you. The sixth sense training of the mind, inward and outward focus. How do we start, especially for children?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hi. So this is, I think one needs to start off with oneself before one takes this to children, because the idea is to begin to embody this, and a lot of the speakers before have spoken, but we largely focus on 4 areas. We focus on attention training that begins with awareness building, and specifically certain practices that we begin to embed using contemplation, but also in terms of mindful listening, building awareness of the external and internal. Then we go on to resiliency skills. I mean, everyone uses these terms. So, someone might use body literacy, someone might use, a generic resiliency term. But like Mahek said, we not only work with grounding, but we work with resourcing, we work with tracking, and we work with shift and stay. So we start working to recognize emotions and separate emotions as feelings and sensations. So you separate your sensations in your body from what you're feeling. So you no longer are asked not to feel something, but you're able to then recognize what that emotion does to your body. The third area in which we start parallelly things from a systems point of view. So once one starts working from an awareness, a personal level, we move externally to social and systems. And all of these are actually, there isn't a hierarchy, but there's definitely not a checklist. There is a structure to it, but the recognition is that everyone, it will manifest in different forms for everyone. So we have a framework in which to operate with enduring capabilities, which we slowly start building. But to recognize that a lot of these are reflective and contemplative practices that build in body literacy and therefore take time. So they don't happen, they're not just cognitive where you receive the information and just say, okay, I've done this, check. So if anyone would like more specific details on how to train this, I'm happy to answer. But in the long and the short of it, I mean, I've just kind of hoped to address this. And a lot of what some of the other speakers have spoken, consider some of the integral parts of the development of the mind training bit. Thank you.
Varsha, you're on mute. Varsha cannot hear you.
We're going to open this up for 3 more questions. So if anyone has any questions, write to us. Mr. Banta, the next question is for you. How do we keep the course of river and direction related to bonding, especially when the river goes wild and they don't remain in any boundaries of their parents? Please share.
Can you just repeat the first part of the question? I think I got it right up to rivers.
The query is for Mr. Banta. How do we keep the course of the river in the right direction related to bonding, especially when the river goes wild and it does not remain in boundaries? This is mainly, I think, from a parent to understand if a child goes a little bit wild, what is it that you can do and what can you do to support?
Well, in particular, when I think of a family constellation being within a space where ideally there is hopefully more than one adult, or at the very least, more than one space within the family unit where you can already make a plan before that happens, so that when young boy, young girl is feeling, that's where you go. We've already practiced it. When that river starts to feel wild, when those kids are starting to feel wild, they've already practiced where they should go, and they have in those spaces the tools and the things that they enjoy the most. Because at that point, they're probably not going to be receptive to too much conversation. They're probably not going to want to see mom and dad or have mom and dad around. They need to be surrounded by the things that they have pre-selected and chosen that calm them, that bring the rushing tides of their river back into flow. So in that way, the adult has already thought about that before it got to that point and put in place all of those things within the home, the way that we do in the classroom and at the school building, so that young boy and young girl can return to regulation sooner rather than later. I hope that answered that question.
Thank you, John. I'm sure it did. If didn't, I'll just ask them to maybe write to you so that you can share a little bit more wisdom. Thank you.
Sure.
The next question is for you, Mahek. How do you deal with defined and compulsive uncontrollable behaviors?
I can't see the question. Will you be able to repeat that for me, please?
I will. Just give me a second. How do you deal with defined and compulsive uncontrollable behaviors?
Okay, so whenever anybody talks to me about behaviors, I just go back to using something called as a simple functional behavior analysis. And when you talk to me about a behavior, unless I really know what is the context in which the behavior happens, what is the antecedent and what is the consequence, it becomes a little hard for me to sort of give you any input. But in general, what I would suggest is a couple of questions you need to ask yourself. So if you're seeing a particular behavior and you see it repetitively, there are a couple of things that you need to think about. And some of them are, when does the behavior happen? In the presence of whom? At what time of the day? What is it that the behavior is getting for the child? So a lot of behaviors are not just for attention seeking, but they satisfy or pacify some sort of need for the child. And you need to identify what that need is. And last but not the least, you need to think about what really happens after the behavior. So what is the consequence of the behavior? Does the child really get what he wants? And also, what is your response or reaction to that child's behavior? So if you start thinking about all these questions, you more or less will have answers about dealing with compulsive behaviors, or was that hyper? Yeah. So defined and compulsive behaviors. If you do not succeed in doing this functional behavior analysis yourself, again, it is very, very important that, obviously a professional does it from a professional standpoint. Now, generally, we're talking about defined and compulsive behaviors that we see in a lot of either ODD or ADHD or, some sort of obsessive compulsive disorders. Now, it's important that we seek professional help. It'll be unfair for me to sort of just give you very generic ideas, because we don't really know what this is. If I had better background about the child, I would probably be able to tell you more. But what I said, and what Mr. Banta has also been reiterating is that you need to first ground yourself and see if you're regulated enough to deal with the child. Right? And we often are approaching a defined or a compulsive child with a lot of anxiety within ourselves, right? So that would be a good place to start. I feel that co-regulation as a parent often works very well. And like Mr. Banta, also, I do that a lot in my sessions as well. When I see the child going off completely, I stop speaking. And then I see the child come back to the screen. And that's what you sometimes need to do as a parent as well. So if you see your child's becoming excessively defined and excessively compulsive, I always tell the parent, back off to move forward. The only way to move forward with working with your child is to take 2 steps back at that point in time and just think about what is this behavior really serving, or what is the consequence of, this child's particular behavior. So yeah, and like I said, sometimes the defiance and the compulsivity could come from something which is obviously much deeper, and that's where you need to get in touch with either your counselor, your psychologist, or your therapist, and seek more individualized solutions. I mean, it would be unfair to just give you a generic idea of how to deal with this.
Thanks, Mahek. Thank you very much. Reshma shared that she will be sharing some resources with us for some activities for the whole family to begin embedding, to start doing mind training practices. Thank you, Reshma. We'll wait to hear back from you, and then we'll share that with our team as well. The last question again, Mahek, is for you, and I think that's a question a lot of parents are asking us right now. If my child is happy doing everything that they're doing with their academics, movement, socializing, do I still need to be worried about screen time? Screen time is a question I know a lot of that has been directed towards you. I'll let you answer that.
Yeah. So screen time, it's pretty interesting because we've done a lot of webinars on screen time, and what we've actually been telling parents is that let's cut the kids a little slack, because right now screens are our only mediums of getting a lot of things done. We have been socially isolated, and it's really important that we still go on with life. We need to get our school work done. We need to get therapies done. We need to stay in touch with grandparents. We need to stay in touch with our friends and all of that. And right now, screens are our only mediums to do that. So again, I just go back to the idea of learning to balance online and offline work. So what I'm suggesting to parents is that, try and have schedules in the day where you can, alternate your online and offline activities with the child. Again, Urvi's also already set the 20-20-20 rule, and she's made some lovely suggestions about how you can, create a more screen-friendly environment, think about the ergonomics, think about the positioning. But most importantly, honestly, this is really not the time where we could think about the WHO recommendations about, screen time and sleep and activity. This is really this is a time that we just have to take each day as it comes, and, try and learn as we go. And if you feel that, the screen is really, honestly, it's not really about the screen. If you go back to what the WHO recommendation about screen time was, the reason why they came up with those recommendations was because they found that childhood obesity was a major problem because children were adhered to screens. And so that's the reason why I keep, highlighting the point of balancing physical and sedentary work. You have to find the balance between your online and offline work. The idea about screens impacting your vision, yes, you have to take every precaution possible. You have the blue light glasses available. You can make screen adjustments, but most importantly, balance your online and offline work. Screens right now are our medium. So honestly, everything that applied in the pre-COVID time does not currently apply. Let's cut ourselves some slack, and let's cut the kids also some slack. And that's, where I'd like to just leave it at that. I mean, you could beg to differ, but that's my opinion, because I feel parents are really, stressing about children being on screens. But I mean, what is the way out? How else do we address everything that needs to go on and, during this pandemic? So I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. I think a lot of people have been asking us that. Even in school, I know a lot of people have been asking us that. But thank you so much for sharing this. I think just because we are now time bound as well, we will end today's conversation. Just want to thank everyone once again for being here. Thank you, panelists. It's been amazing. We hope to see you soon. Hopefully, even maybe physically, whenever time permits. Thank you very, very much.
I'd like to say thank you to everyone too. Thank you.
That's Indira. She's our founder. Thank you so much for being on. Indira, you want to say anything?
No, I just thought it was so it's something that of course I know Reshma very well, and I've seen Mahek's work, and it was just nice to hear it again. And as an audience or as a parent, for me, this was it's important to hear other people say that. So when it's actually happening to you, like what you're doing is okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being there for us. And yes, and over to you, Varsha. Thank you.
Thank you, Indira. Thank you, audience, for being here. We will be sharing the next one with you soon. You can invite more people. Hopefully, we'll have more space as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Shilpa. See you. John.